I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. The Senate passed the Honoring Our PACT Act on Thursday. The legislation had wide bipartisan support and will provide health care to veterans exposed to toxic substances. The act is named after Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. Robinson died as a result of cancer after his exposure to burn pits during his military service. Listen in as Senator Rob Portman shares more about the late Robinson.
First, I want to thank my colleague from Delaware via Columbus, Ohio, for his comments. And I want to talk for a moment about what we did today in the United States Senate. We passed legislation very important to our veterans that has to do with expanding VA, veterans health care coverage, but specifically addresses the problem of our veterans who have been exposed to burn pits, toxic burn pits that have resulted in terrible illnesses, including cancer and others. The legislation we passed is named the Heath Robinson PACT Act. And people may wonder, well, who's Heath Robinson? Why is it named after him? Heath Robinson was from Pickerington, Ohio, which is a small community outside of Columbus, Ohio. He enlisted in the Ohio National Guard. He became a sergeant first class. He did tours of duty in Kosovo, also in Iraq. He was with the 285th Area Support Medical Company and was a two-time Ohio Army National Guard NCO of the Year in 2012 and 2013. So a very distinguished career in the military. In 2020, he died of cancer. And when you talk to the medical professionals, they say that his exposure to burn pits was what resulted in his cancer developing and the end of his life way too soon. So his widow, Danielle, who some people may remember was at the State of the Union up in the gallery, and his mom, Kathy, and his daughter, Brielle, have been tireless advocates for addressing this burn pit issue, trying to stop the burn pits from being used, but of course addressing the consequence of these burn pits. And they have channeled their grief in a constructive way, which is to encourage Congress to pass this legislation that we passed today. So many other veterans who have been exposed to burn pits will now get better health care because of their work and because of the tribute that's being paid to their father and husband and son, Heath Robinson. So that's who Heath Robinson is, and that's why it was important to name that legislation today after him. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to have my next remarks appear elsewhere in the record.
Without objection.
I am also rising today to ask unanimous consent from my colleagues to pass other legislation, S2129, a bipartisan bill that I have co-authored with my colleague from Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown. It honors a young man named Otto Warmbier, and it counters North Korea's censorship and surveillance state. Otto Warmbier was a native of my hometown in Cincinnati, Ohio, and his wonderful family are dear friends. He was a young man of great spirit, great intellect, and great promise. He was a student, a star at the University of Virginia. In 2015, he went to North Korea with a tour group. It was a cultural visit with people from the United States, from Europe, looking to see what North Korea was like. They were there for a very brief period of time, but at the end of that brief visit, as he was waiting in line at the airport to leave with fellow members of the tour, North Korean security officials grabbed him and pulled him out of line. He was detained, and then eventually he was sentenced for 15 years on trumped-up charges relating to whether or not he tried to take down a poster that was a political poster. 15 years. Otto Warmbier, again, a young man of great promise, was unjustly convicted and imprisoned. And during a 17-month period of imprisonment, captivity, he was badly mistreated by the North Koreans, to the point that when he was returned to the United States in 2017, he came back in a comatose state from which he never recovered. Otto Warmbier died almost exactly 5 years ago today, June 19th, 2017. He was 22 years old, his whole life ahead of him. So 5 years ago, life changed forever for Otto's friends, for his parents, his classmates. His service, his funeral was extraordinary, the outpouring of love. His parents, Fred and Cindy, have taken their grief and done something very constructive with it. They have focused on exposing what North Korea is really like, and also ensuring that to the extent possible, North Korea is held accountable for this atrocity. No parent should have to endure what they went through. I've worked with Senators Brown, Coons, Tillis, Van Hollen, and Haggerty, as well as the Warmbiers, as well as the Biden administration on this legislation. It's called the Otto Warmbier North Korea Censorship and Surveillance Act. It would authorize sanctions against any foreign individuals involved in censoring the North Korean people's access to information on behalf of the Kim Jong-un regime. Of course, the North Koreans aren't getting the truth because information is censored. So it's very important to get whatever real news you can into the country. When that happens, what you find out is that people leave North Korea and then work against the regime. But so many people don't have access to that information. So this bill authorizes the United States Agency for Global Media to find new and creative ways to circumvent North Korean censorship, and provides $10 million annually for the next 5 years to counter North Korea's repressive censorship and surveillance state, including something very practical and needed, which is repairing the antennas that have been used for this purpose that were damaged in a typhoon a few years ago and have never been fixed because we haven't had the funding. This bill has adequate funding to put in place the infrastructure that is now going to be necessary to effectively send true, accurate information into North Korea to counter North Korean propaganda for the sake of the people of North Korea. Together, this chamber can send a bipartisan message to the world that we will not stand for the censorship and the repression of the North Korean regime. So I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. It's something we have worked on carefully. We've gotten technical assistance from the administration, something that I hope we can pass here this evening, and then we can, in turn, get it passed in the House of Representatives and get it to the President for his signature. So, Mr. President, I would now like to call up this legislation. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of the calendar number 159 S2129.